We are taught governments hold supreme power, but declassified records, insider testimonies, and historical evidence prove private banks are the true masters. They control money creation, interest rates, and credit flow, the very lifeblood of nations. Politicians may make laws, but banks decide who gets funded, who prospers, and who fails. This is not conspiracy. It is the hidden architecture of modern governance. For centuries, money was issued by states. That changed in 1694 with the Bank of England, the first privately owned central bank. Its founders realized, whoever controls the supply of money controls the nation. The model spread. Private bankers would lend money to governments at interest, gradually gaining influence over policy. By the 20th century, nearly every nation had handed over monetary power to private banking cartels. The most critical truth: banks create money out of nothing. When a loan is issued, new currency is typed into existence. No gold or savings required. Governments do not create their own money. They borrow it from banks, paying interest to private shareholders. This gives banks unlimited leverage. They can expand or shrink the money supply at will, triggering booms, busts, or crises to force governments to submit to their demands. The U.S. Federal Reserve is often mistaken for a government agency. It is privately owned by the largest banks. Created in secret in 1913, it controls U.S. currency, sets rates, and answers to no elected official. Former President Woodrow Wilson later admitted, "I have unwittingly ruined my country." A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. The Fed dictates policy, not Congress. The ECB operates above national governments and parliaments. It is owned and governed by private and national banks, not voters. It can dictate austerity, spending cuts, and economic policy to member states, as seen during the Eurozone crisis. Nations were forced to surrender sovereignty to save banks. The ECB proves monetary power trumps democratic will. A small network of megabanks dominates global finance. BlackRock, Vanguard, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, HSBC. Studies confirm these institutions own controlling stakes in almost every major corporation, media outlet, and political lobby. They form an interconnected cartel, acting as one unit. No government can challenge them without facing economic collapse. Governments run permanent deficits, borrowing endlessly from banks. National debt is not accidental, it is a tool of control. Interest payments consume huge portions of national budgets, leaving leaders with no choice but to serve bank interests. The higher the debt, the tighter the leash. Nations become debtors, forced to adopt policies favorable to creditors, not their own people. Banks spend billions annually on lobbying, campaign donations, and think tanks. They write financial laws, shape tax codes, and block reforms that threaten their power. Research shows bank-funded politicians vote 85% in line with banking interests. Laws appear to serve the public, but are secretly drafted to protect and expand bank control. Democracy becomes a facade. There is a constant flow. Bank executives become treasury secretaries, central bank governors, or economic advisors, then return to finance. This revolving door ensures total institutional capture. Regulators are often former bankers, sympathetic to their former employers. Laws are enforced lightly, loopholes preserved, and true accountability eliminated. The fox guards the henhouse. Banks fund both sides of nearly every major war. Wars require massive borrowing, generating huge interest profits. Bankers encourage conflict because war expands debt and concentrates power. Historian Anthony Sutton documented how Wall Street financed both the Allies and Axis in World War II. Governments are drawn into conflicts, not for national interest, but to serve banking profits. Recessions, depressions, and crashes are rarely natural. Banks contract credit, raise rates, or speculate recklessly, triggering crises deliberately. When economies collapse, governments are forced to borrow more, accept bailouts, and hand over greater control. The 1929 crash, 2008 meltdown, and 2020 crisis all followed this pattern. Crisis gives rescue, gives deeper subjugation. When debt spirals, banks demand austerity, cuts to healthcare, education, pensions, and public services. The burden falls on citizens, never on banks. Governments have no choice but to comply. Default means financial ruin. Austerity weakens nations, reduces resistance, and ensures long-term dependency. It is economic servitude disguised as necessary reform. Banks manipulate exchange rates, flood markets, or withdraw capital to destabilize nations. Weak currencies, hyperinflation, or capital flight are used to force regime change. Governments that resist banking power are economically isolated and destroyed. Money becomes a weapon, far more powerful than armies, to bring rebellious leaders to heel. The IMF, World Bank, and Bank for International Settlements act as the global arm of private banking. They lend to struggling nations with strict conditions, privatization, deregulation, and opening markets to foreign capital. These bodies effectively govern developing nations, dictating policy without any democratic mandate. They are the enforcers of the global banking empire. Under bank-imposed conditions, governments are forced to sell off public assets, water, energy, transport, telecoms, public wealth transfers to private banking-owned corporations. Essential services become profit-making ventures, raising costs for citizens. Nations lose control over their own infrastructure, permanently surrendering sovereignty to financial interests. Banks shape tax laws to favor capital over labor. Low corporate taxes, loopholes, offshore havens, and wealth protection schemes. Ordinary people pay more. Banks and billionaires pay less. This widens inequality and concentrates wealth in fewer hands. Governments willingly comply, fearing capital flight and economic collapse if they dare to tax finance fairly. Most financial regulations are written by bankers themselves. They appear strict, but are designed to eliminate competition and entrench monopoly. Smaller banks are crushed. Megabanks grow larger. Too big to fail laws guarantee public bailouts for reckless behavior. Regulation does not limit power, it protects and expands it. Banks own major media groups or control them via advertising revenue. Critical reporting on banking power is suppressed. The public is fed stories about greedy politicians or market forces, never the true source of control. The narrative is carefully crafted to keep the public blind. Media becomes a shield for the financial elite. Almost all major political parties rely on bank donations and financial backing. No party can win power without banking approval. Candidates who challenge the system are starved of funds, smeared, or marginalized. The choice voters get is between different faces, all loyal to the same financial masters. Democracy becomes an empty ritual. University economics departments are funded by banks. Textbooks downplay or omit the history of private money creation and bank control. Students are taught the system is natural and fair. True critics are sidelined or defeated. Generations grow up unaware of the invisible rulers, accepting debt and inequality as inevitable facts of life. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are the next step. Issued and controlled directly by banks, they allow full tracking restriction and even freezing of individual spending. Governments will act as mere distributors. This gives banks absolute power over every transaction, every citizen, and every aspect of economic life. Inflation is not accidental. It is created when banks expand the money supply. It erodes savings, reduces purchasing power, and forces citizens deeper into debt. It is a silent tax that governments do not have to vote on. Banks profit while people grow poorer. Inflation is a tool to transfer wealth from the masses to the financial elite. Credit systems are used to grade and discipline citizens. Those who conform get easy credit. Dissenters face financial exclusion. Access to life itself depends on good standing with the banking system. This creates self-policing compliance. People avoid opposing the system to protect their financial future. Credit becomes a modern form of serfdom. Banks push for free trade, deregulation, and global supply chains. This weakens national economies, reduces self-sufficiency, and makes nations dependent on global finance. Governments surrender trade powers to international bodies. Local industries collapse, debt rises. Nations become mere cogs in a financial machine. Banks inflate property prices through easy credit, then tighten lending, creating boom-bust cycles. Housing becomes unaffordable for most, while banks profit from mortgages. Governments are pressured to keep prices high to protect the financial system. People are trapped in lifelong debt, serving banks as modern tenants. Banks fund and shape energy policy, pushing green transitions or fossil fuels, depending on profitability. They dictate what energy nations use and how much it costs. Governments follow, aligning climate or energy laws with banking investment strategies. Even the environment becomes a financial asset to be controlled. Essential services are increasingly privatized and financed by banks. Healthcare and education become debt-driven industries. Governments cut funding, forcing citizens to borrow to access basic needs. Lifelong student and medical debt keeps generations trapped. Even human well-being becomes a profit stream for banks. Banks push for mass surveillance, financial tracking, biometrics, and digital IDs to enforce compliance and detect resistance. Governments adopt these measures to stabilize the financial order. Surveillance becomes a tool to protect banking power, not citizens. Privacy is sacrificed to maintain control. Banks lead efforts to cut off financial access to nations or groups labeled dangerous. Sanctions are far more destructive than bombs, crippling economies and forcing submission. Governments implement these measures, serving as the enforcement arm of global finance. Financial exclusion is the ultimate punishment for defiance. Banks push for supranational bodies, the UN, World Economic Forum, to harmonize rules and bypass national governments. They envision a single global financial system, eliminating borders and national sovereignty. Governments are reduced to local administrators. The end goal: one world, one currency, one banking master. Few dare challenge banking power. Politicians fear financial ruin. Citizens are distracted. Media stays silent. Resistance is systematically crushed economically, socially, and professionally. Awareness is the only weapon. Once the people understand who truly rules, the spell breaks, and change becomes possible. History is full of leaders who tried to free nations from bank control: Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Thomas Jefferson, Adolf Hitler. All faced fierce opposition. Many were assassinated or overthrown. Their attempts to issue state-controlled currency were quickly reversed. The pattern proves banks will stop at nothing to maintain their dominion. Banking control leads to rising inequality, poverty, debt, and social unrest. Generations are born into financial servitude. Nations lose their independence. Democracy becomes a sham. The human spirit is diminished, reduced to working to repay debt. This is the hidden price of letting banks rule. Key indicators: permanent national debt, private central bank, revolving door between finance and government, endless lobbying, frequent economic crises, austerity policies, and suppression of monetary reform. Recognizing these signs reveals the true power structure, stripping away the illusion of self-governance. Yes, banks do control governments, confirmed by historical record, insider admissions, institutional structure, and observable outcomes. Governments are not rulers, they are agents of the financial elite. Money is power, and banks hold the monopoly on money. To reclaim true freedom, nations must reclaim the power to create and control their own currency.